Hi, Bruce Plourde, American Studies. Do you know how to do a close reading of poetry?
No.
Would you like to know something about it?
Yes.
When we say close reading in reference to poetry, we already acknowledge that poetry is a concentrated form of language and that every word is significant. But a close reading focuses upon certain key words or expressions. In focusing on those key parts, we hope to come to a stronger reading of the poem's significance. Literature students can find that a close reading of a poem can be much richer and much different than an initial reading. As an example, let's take E. E. Cummings' poem, Unjust. Cummings was a poet who wrote during the modernist period, so he uses the form of poetry as a space for experimentation with both form and language. Cummings is playful as a poet, and his poetry can be fun if you embrace his playfulness. Unjust is one of his most famous poems. In just spring, when the world is mud, luscious, a little lame balloon man whistles far and wee. And Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring, when the world is puddle wonderful. The queer old balloon man whistles far and wee, and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. Initially, we read the happy springtime poem about boys playing marbles and piracies and girls dancing and playing hopscotch. We know that it's spring because we get the great words that aren't really words but should be: mud luscious and puddle wonderful. Also, we know it's spring because the narrator, whoever it is, tells us joyously that it's spring. And if we look at that comment, we see that it's broken up unusually. Each word has its own line. It's spring, and the usage of space on the page seems to suggest how we should read the lines. If each word is alone on its own line, first of all, it's probably important, and second of all, we must have to slow down a bit. So, let's take a look at the spacing on the page. We should notice that Cummings is playing with that space. In some places, the words are compressed together, suggesting motion or speed, such as Eddie and Bill and Betty and Isabel. This compression of the names seems to indicate that the two pairs are together and indistinguishable as separate entities, and that they are young kids moving and playing. In other places, the words are spread out on the page, suggesting that the pace slows down. The balloon man whistles far and wee. And the spacing suggests something about the time, but also about how far the whistle reaches outward to the areas of the park. So what have we seen so far in our close reading is that we have a happy time. Spring has historically been seen as the time of hope, of rebirth, of renewal, of love. Cummings here is surely relying upon those past associations. What makes up that happiness are the groups of children who are playing in the park. They are youthful, they are innocent, they are happily playing together, everything that we would expect in a happy springtime outing with the children. We also see a balloon man there who seems to be a part of the happy setting. I mean, what child doesn't love balloons? But there is something ominous about the presence of this man. Let's look more closely at him and how he's described. First, he's described as little and lame, which suggests something about his physical nature. Maybe he's old, maybe he's disabled, maybe he's poor, and the only job that he can get is selling balloons to kids. We also see him whistling. We have seen other characters in literature who beckon to children to make them come, and they are sometimes positive characters, but sometimes, like with the Pied Piper, they have been malicious. So perhaps we aren't sure what to think when we see that the children interrupt their games and come running when the balloon man whistles to them. Later, he's described as a queer old balloon man. He's odd, he's old, and in 1920, when the poem was written, there is surely the suggestion of his sexuality. Finally, he is shown to be goat-footed. What is Cummings' intention with that one detail? Who else has been described as goat-footed? If you know your Greek mythology, then you would see a goat-footed man as a satyr, or as a pan. Satyrs were creatures who were half man and half goat. They would run through the woods, playing their pipe flutes, and would have raucous sex with any maidens or nymphs that they happened to meet along the way. In many images that we have, the satyrs have permanent erections. So, in pursuing the details, we have a very different image of this lovely spring day than when we started. We have the innocence of childhood, and we have a potentially dangerous and damaging figure whose intentions may be to corrupt or destroy that innocence. Perhaps that is why Cummings described this moment as unjust. A close reading of poetry means delving into the poem for the richest possible experience. If we are to do a proper close reading, sometimes we have to turn to our own experience of the world and impose it upon the poem. Sometimes we have to ask appropriate questions and do a bit of digging or research. Sometimes we have to do our best to understand the author's intentions from the clues that the poem contains. In any case, we do a close reading of a poem so that we can offer a more comprehensive explanation of that poem. A poem is like a story, and at the same time it's like a puzzle, but it's always possible to create our own informed reading of a poem.
And that's how you would do a close reading of a poem.
Great.